Hi, you're watching Analog Output. I'm Rich Holmes, and this time I'm going to talk about microtuning with semi-modular synthesizers. What do we mean by microtuning? Well, here's a keyboard, and there are white keys and black keys, and the black keys come in groups of 2 and 3, and the pattern repeats every 12 keys. If we start, for instance, at this key, this gives us the note A, and if we go up 12 keys, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. The next one is the A that's an octave higher, and we count 12 keys again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and then we've got the A that's an octave higher again. So there are 12 keys to each octave, and they divide the octave up into 12 equal pieces, which are called semitones or half steps. But okay, why 12? Could we instead have like 7 notes to the octave, or 15 or 24 or something else? And could we use notes that are not equally spaced? And the answer is, of course, yes, we could. So why 12 equally spaced? Well, that is a long story, and maybe I'll do a video about it sometime. But the short answer is there are good reasons based on acoustics and vibrational modes for that choice. The very slightly longer answer is there are no really perfect ways to tune a keyboard instrument, but the consensus for many decades has been that 12 equal semitones per octave is the best compromise we can make. And certainly if you use almost any other number like 11 or 13 or 16 notes to the octave, you get something quite weird sounding. But weird sounding isn't always bad, and if you own a semi-modular synthesizer, there's a pretty good chance you like weird sounding. So you might be interested in what happens if you use non-standard tunings. And there are some synthesizers that have as a feature the ability to use non-standard tunings. The Moog Sub-Fatty and I think the subsequent Fit 37, Korg Monologue, I think are examples in hardware, and there are others in hardware and software. And if you're interested in electronic music production with non-standard tunings, you almost certainly would want to use one of these instruments. But if you have a semi-modular synthesizer, you can at least play with tuning to a limited degree. It's sort of awkward to get anything done, but it's fun to mess around with. So let me illustrate that with a Mother 32. This, of course, has your push-button keyboard on the front panel and also a MIDI in port. So you can use a MIDI keyboard. And down inside what's happening is there's circuitry that looks at the MIDI data coming in and figures out which note you want, and it calculates the appropriate control voltage to send to the VCO. The standard being 1 volt per octave, and middle C on the keyboard is 0 volts. So if I press middle C, it sends 0 volts to the VCO. If I go up 1 key, it sends 1/12 of a volt. If I go up 2 keys, it sends 2/12 volts, and so on. If I go up 12 keys, which is supposed to be 1 octave, it sends 1 volt. Way up there, it sends 1 volt, and the VCO indeed goes up 1 octave. But now suppose we do this. On the patch panel, we have keyboard out. If I plug this from keyboard out into VCO 1 volt per octave, what happens? Well, if I start at middle C and well, let's start an octave below middle C since that's where the camera is. If I start at an octave below middle C and go up 1 key on the keyboard, the voltage on the patch panel goes up by 1/12 of a volt, and that gets sent to the VCO. But the VCO is still connected internally to the keyboard, and you can't remove that connection, so it also gets a 1/12 of a volt that way, which means altogether the control voltage goes up by 2/12 of a volt. So instead of going up 1 semitone, it goes up 2. If I go up 2 keys on the keyboard, the VCO goes up 4 semitones, and so on. If I go up 6 keys, So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. If I go up 6 keys, the VCO goes up 1 octave. 6 more keys, 1 more octave. So that means the keyboard is now mapped to 6 keys per octave instead of 12. Okay, so normally you get 12 notes to the octave, and this way instead you get 6 to the octave. What if you wanted 7 or 9 or something in between? Well, you can use the VC mixer as an attenuator. So you plug the keyboard control voltage into mix 2, and you plug the VC mix output into VCO 1 volt per octave. And now if you have the mix knob all the way to the left, you get 12 notes to the octave, and all the way to the right is 6 to the octave. And in between is in between. Now you notice middle C doesn't change when you move the mix knob. So I'll play middle C and I'll move the mix knob and it doesn't move. And that's because middle C key always gives you 0 volts internally and at the patch panel. So it always sums up to 0 volts. So you can tune, for instance, 7 notes to the octave like this. You count up 7 keys from middle C. So here's middle C. You go up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And now you adjust the mix knob so that is the G key, and you adjust the mix knob so that it gives you 1 octave above middle C, which is there. And you can use an electronic tuner to get it pretty precise, or you can just do it by ear and caught close enough. And now you have a 7-note octave between the middle C and the G key. And another 7-note octave between the G key and the D key. And so on. Now, of course, the keyboard is still set up in a repeating pattern of 12 keys, so 7 keys to the octave doesn't map very nicely onto that structure. Which is why, again, if you really want to play music in 7 notes to the octave in a serious way, you'd be better off doing it on a synth that's built to allow for that. But you can mess with 7 or 8 or 9 or 10 or 11 notes in this way. Just for fun. Now, what you can't get is fewer than 6 notes to the octave or more than 12, which means that, in fact, even though I promised microtones, which refers to having more than 12 notes to the octave with smaller intervals between them, this is macrotones, which is less than 12 notes to the octave with larger intervals. So I lied? Well, no, I didn't lie. You cannot do smaller intervals using the VCO because it has the keyboard control voltage connected permanently to it. The minimum voltage change from 1 volt to the next is the built-in 1/12 volt, and all you can do is make that larger. But there are 2 other oscillators that don't have the keyboard control voltage connected on the Mother 32. One is the LFO. You can run the LFO up into the audio range somewhat. So patch, for instance, the LFO square wave into the external audio and turn the mix up all the way to the right. And there we have a note coming from the low frequency oscillator. And it's the same note regardless of what key I press, because we don't have the keyboard output control voltage connected into the LFO. So let's do that, okay? So we'll take the VC mix output, and instead of into the VCO 1 volt per octave, we'll put that into the LFO rate. Okay, and we'll turn the mix knob all the way up. Now the VCO is calibrated by our good friends at the Moog factory to be precisely 1 volt per octave. But the LFO control voltage is not calibrated. It might be a little more than 1 volt per octave, it might be a little less, and it'll vary from one Mother 32 to another. On mine, it's less than 1 volt per octave, which means that when the mix knob is all the way up, 12 keys on the keyboard correspond to less than 1 octave. So here's from C to C. And it's not quite an octave. In fact, an octave is more like 13 or 14. So, we have, in fact, more than 12 notes per octave in any case. And by turning the mix knob down, we can get more notes per octave. So again, you can start at middle C, and let's go up, say, 15 keys. That's 12, 13, 14, 15. That's this E flat key here, and we'll tune that to be an octave above that first note. It's pretty close to it already. Just to adjust the mix a little bit. All right. And now we have it set up for 15 notes to the octave. And again, you probably wouldn't want to do production of a 15 note to the octave song this way, but you can mess around with it. I did do a 15 to the octave song some years ago using a soft sampler and microtuning capable control software. Here's a bit of it. If you crank the knob all the way to the left, you get the same note with all keys, which is essentially basically infinite notes per octave. So in principle, you can get any number of notes per octave greater than about 12 or 13 or so this way. Although the more notes you try for it, the harder it is to tune precisely. Now finally, the Mother 32 has one more oscillator. It's the VCF with the resonance up high enough for self-oscillation. Let's unplug the LFO end of this cable, leave the other end in, and now turn up the resonance. And we get sine wave, which we can tune with the VCF cutoff control. And then we move the VC mix output from the LFO rate to the VCF cutoff. And here again, it's only roughly 1 volt per octave uncalibrated. So I get pretty close to an octave with 12 keys, but you might get a little more or a little again, the number of notes per octave increases as you play with the mixed knobs. So this again is pretty close to 15 to the octave. So there you go. The way the Mother 32 is built, you can only get 12 or fewer notes to the octave with the VCO, and you can only get about 12 or more with the LFO or the VCF. But between the two of them, you pretty much covered everything from 6 to the octave on up. So have fun with that. And as usual, if you like this video, please hit the like button. And if you subscribe, you'll get notified about the future videos, including maybe one where I explain where the 12 equal division of the octave comes from in the first place. And for instance, why 19 notes to the octave might be something of interest to you. And other synthesizer topics as well. See you next time on Analog Output.